So I'm going to go over a couple taxonomies, and this first one is a good example of that. Make sure there's no other questions. This is kind of nice studies. So this is a great example. This is work done from Kai Chan. He's out of University of British Columbia, not too far away from here, and he actually presents up and down the West Coast, Canada. So he has lots of good stuff on cultural services. He often presents in the context of Indigenous groups. He does great work on just breaking out and consolidating this cultural field as the MEA had established it. And he recognizes that the subsistence category and everything that is included in it, and is often just walked over very simply. So he identifies the services in the middle column and the benefits to people on that right side. And in our US Forest Service work, we actually went over a lot of this literature to try to gather a lot of these subjects. This is again mostly in the rural context, and our goal again was to just create a cohesive list as much as we could. Another tool or another classification comes out of it's called SOLVES tool. That stands for Social Evaluation of Ecosystem Services. And this tool actually is a survey mechanism that you can actually output onto a GIS system. And it's quite difficult because you have to actually implement a survey, and it usually takes months to even over a year to implement this. But they provide a pretty short but good classification system on things that you can actually spatially reference, even something as tangible as future historic value, like where certain populations that go to their study areas place this sort of value on the map. And you can actually draw these things and fill out the survey, so they can later on go and actually show where, of maybe 100+ respondents, where they place this sort of value in the park, and allows them to create prioritizations as a result. So another classification system. This is work done by the Puget Sound Institute. They're based in Tacoma. They work out of the Urban Waters building along with a couple UW labs over there. And this was working with, again, in a rural context, and I forget which tribe it is in the Quinault, the Quinault region. I forget exactly which basin they're working out of, but in working with this tribe and some specific development issues, they actually surveyed each one of them and also took narratives and kind of coded each, looked for the text that popped out. And I identified those social cultural values that existed within their narratives and their value system. And they're able to show, how much, value they placed and created this diagram that just shows the extent in which, people took, placed a value in this specific example in this specific region. And, some of the things that pop out is they placed, quite a large, identity value in this region. So they associated themselves with the region itself, and as much as that ties to the pride. And actually, salmon sold within the market scored pretty low as far as what they, found to be valuable, and which was an interesting outcome when I was talking to the researcher who led this project. And by the way, every one of these cases has at least one, if not 5, 6, 7 papers on the subjects. If anything's of interest, maybe I can connect with Lola and give anybody the information necessary.
And could you go back to the previous slide real quick?
Sure.
Thank you. So were these categories determined by the participants, like the outcome of the surveys, or were these options that were given to participants?
It was really kind of developed in an ad hoc manner. So it was they did a lot of they called it coding of narratives, I think is where they got their largest sample size. And so once they found the repetitive language or the repetitive values that came up, they would actually group them up, see what kind of popped up the most, and then created their classification based on the system.
Thank you.
And the paper is actually really cool because they have lots of pictures and the workshops in it.
So does this actually have a name then?
They don't have a name for it specifically. The author's name and the creator of this framework was VNC. So I associated with the tribe and it's I forget the river basin that they studied specifically, the Quinault Lake region. So it's really the title of the paper. I might classify the system. And finally, this is finally the urban context. This is some great work done by Kathy Wolf. She's a social scientist out of UW Seattle.
She's going to be coming to speak next Thursday at the
Really?
Virtual Person Forum. Yeah.
Kathy, I would go to that. That's a really, yeah, she just took a sabbatical for like a month and writing a book, and so I'm wondering what it has to do with that. But
No, we specifically sought her out.
yeah, that's excellent. Well, this is her work, and she might even be talking about it if she's doing a pretty high-level assessment. But well, in that case, I'll skim over it so she can have lots of material. But so what her objective was in the urban context and the city context, they combed over the literature and found every publication they could on interactions with nature in the urban context. And from that, they just pulled out those benefits that people receive. There's tons of study on mental health. For example, the benefits that somebody recovering in a hospital has when they look outside and see nature versus a brick wall. Recovery times are even enhanced in that case. ADHD treatment of children who experience nature more than others. Just there's tons of categories here. And so what they're able to do is, again, she has, I think, about nowadays 3,000 plus articles that she's able to skim over with a couple PhD graduate students to create this classification. And UW now houses this. This is actually a website. If you were to Google Green Cities UW, it'll take you straight to this page, which I screenshot and put it on the slide. So that's yeah, great. Kathy was an advisor in our U.S. Forest Service work. She's my favorite person ever. And again, this is our goal in the U.S. Forest Service work. I was actually kind of working off Kathy's work to not only include the rural context and the services that exist there, but also to create a classification so that we can end up identifying methodologies and tools that exist to allow you to measure a lot of these services. And so her work was a great jumping off point, especially in the rural contexts. So our goal is to create what we call the new cultural service framework, and in the document that you guys read for this talk, we refer to it as kind of the new framework. And this is a consolidated version, but this is kind of the broader categories we came up with that kind of covered the rural to urban spectrum with as many of the services that we could throw in there. So it's kind of a lot, and every time I show this, somebody recognizes something that's missing.
Oh.
And so, and we attempted to be exhaustive, but we kind of knew that was going to happen, especially as people identify new and great things in the future. So I'd be interested, can anybody see anything that's missing? Anything that, sometimes they're kind of consolidated into one thing. One of the client actually, who ended up reviewing the final work, he finally realized after a while, he's like, foraging is not in here. Where's foraging?
Yeah.
And then so I actually, for this slide, threw it up in the top. So that's now in there, but there might be something here. I won't stay on this too long, but if you look at...
Can you unpack future a little bit?
Say again?
Can you unpack future?
So that category was pulled primarily from the SOLVES tool, and what they do, and there's several publications that are free at access online if you just Google that particular acronym and put USGS at the end because they developed the tool. But they say, what sort of value do you hold that you think future generations will enjoy? So it's a pretty open question, but it's really just asking kind of the future generation question. And a lot of times when you're dealing with indigenous groups, that's a very high focus. But oftentimes this SOLVES tool is often done in national forests or national parks, and you'll find that still recreational enthusiasts often place a pretty good amount of value in the future category as well. So, yeah, and a lot of these could be unpacked. I went to a talk at a conference not too recently where a guy had just done this subject alone on the job satisfaction. He had 39 categories on that alone. So these definitely do unpack to a large extent.
Yeah, sure.
So measuring them, this is an interesting concept. I tried to find one of the most difficult maps I could and put it up as a PowerPoint slide. This is the representation of cement kilns, petroleum refineries, and power plants. Just to kind of throw up the concept there of recognizing cultural value or social value. And I'm going to say cultural value from now on, but I'm not talking specifically about the indigenous benefit, but just in general the social context, the health context. So in this case, if you were to start off with a map that pinpointed cement kilns and petroleum refineries and power plants, and it's also colored by my, this specific study, which I skimmed over, I found a not credibly strong, but a fairly strong correlation with these plans existing where people of color exist. And so that was the purpose of the study, was to show that benefit. And so as far as identifying, those sorts of social inequalities, that's the approach this took. And so there's really a very rich realm as far as how you might approach measuring these sort of things. So lots of things to consider. The scale is obviously going to be the biggest one. When you're in the urban contexts, the fine scale is probably almost required when you're kind of doing a broad assessment. In your guys' campus example, that's, I think that's the route you're taking, which is probably a good idea because there's so much going on in this context. It's going to be quite difficult. But, a lot of times we've come across large assessments across large swaths of land. And, when you're working with indigenous groups, every individual tribe or community of people kind of have separate needs, or they place separate cultural, or I guess I'm going back into I guess I'll call it spiritual value in a specific part of the land, whether that's geographically based or just kind of a sense of identity. So scale is going to be essential when you're talking about these different categories, and also where you lie on this urban to rural gradient. By the way, this is a